am a dream defender and also a staff youth organizer at Power Youth Center for Social Change. A little bit else about me, I'm a filmmaker and graphic novelist and writer. I'm here to talk to you today about prison abolition. One issue that many people want to know more about and the right does not want to hear about. All right, I'm gonna jump right into it. So, what is y'all's idea of a prison? What's a prison? It can be physical, metaphorical, spiritual. What is a prison?
It's a place that takes away your freedom.
Yeah, like an institutionalized cage.
It's something that sequesters people from the rest of society who society wants to be separated from.
Right.
But sometimes prison comes outside of the actual prison. Things like ankle bracelets or people's rights being taken away.
Word. So I think what's important for me with a prison is all prisons aren't physical, right? And so I think when we think about prisons and prison abolition, this is a cultural change, a societal change, a physical change, but also a cultural change, a spiritual change, right? So to me, a prison is a cage, whether it's a physical one, spiritual one, a mental one. Like I'm imprisoned in the idea of patriarchy. I do not actually have the ability to unlock myself from that cage. The same way that an inmate does not have the ability to unlock themselves from a physical cage that is separated them from society, right? And I feel like a spiritual way to look at a prison is it is locking you away from being your most best being, right? So if I'm imprisoned to patriarchy, I'm not able to be my fullest emotional, mental, spiritual, physical self, right? I'm locked into these ideas. So that I want to define that first, because when we talk about prison abolition, we're not just talking about the physical buildings. That's what we're talking about the most as our work. But prison abolition as a framework is about a change of how people exist in this world, right? What is the history of prisons? Does anyone know? When did prisons start? When did prisons become a thing? No one thinks so yet. So prisons have been around for a very long time. Pretty much as long as society has had punitive punishment. So prisons have existed such as dungeons or areas where people have been exiled. Some of our earliest writings, right? People are describing prisons even though they're literally out in the actual world, exiled from their own countries. You know what I'm saying? They're locked away. And one of the things that I think is important when we think about the history of prisons is that it's always connected to an exile from society, right? An exile from a person that you could become. So I think oftentimes we say it keeps people away, but it actually exiles them away. It deems them something unworthy to be around us. They do not deserve our capacity. And the prisons and police have always interacted the same way as well, right? So for a lot of times in our histories, violence that was happening in our communities, like a time when eye for eye happened, you cut someone's head off, you lost an arm, you didn't go to prison. Prison has also been really directly connected to property, right? When you destroy properties, in history, we went to prisons. And so today, we see that state violence is really circled with police and prisons, right? So if I'm a person who is asking for a systematic change and I do a direct action, I'm oftentimes hit by the police, arrested by the police, taken to a prison or jail, go through trial as an awaiting for the official case that they have against me to actually lock me away, right? So they have a very direct link, and they have very different interactions with society, right? So although there's a lot of sexual assault that happens with police and prisons, there's also just a high rate of suicide that comes with prisons, murderings, children being vanished. There's different things that happens in prisons that don't always happen specifically from police, right? So they have these two different ways of interacting. They have these two different ways of being parallel together, and they have this very intimate relationship. So I want to start a conversation a little bit, my presentation a little bit, with prisons as it affects the people who are making up the most of the prison population today, right? So we're going to start with post-chattel slavery. 13th Amendment, we always talk about it. You are no longer forced to do manual labor without pay unless you are a criminal against the state, right? And so when we look at this time with the 13th Amendment, we see that black people went from slavery to free, right, in the South, because black people in the North were pretty much just second-class citizens, but not necessarily enslaved. And then you look at like the Angola prison in Louisiana, right after their freedom, that prison becomes a thing and has a huge population of black people now doing the same jobs they were doing during slavery, but also we're not just from the South. Black people from the North could be arrested and taken down to the Angola prison. You have, so in the Angola prison is important in our historical context because that was where the first uprising of prisoners were that we, I would say, canonized in our modern day movements. But this prison is one of the first prisons built on the United States lands in the South to house freed slaves and freed black people in the North. And then you keep continuing to look at the trends of prison populations. They're growing faster than slave populations were, right? So like you can only get another slave if you basically force them to have sex, get pregnant, or natural processes of that to have children. And in prisons, you can actually have populations by just creating laws that allow you to incriminate black people. And so during the Reconstruction period, that's ultimately how Jim Crow became a thing, right? So Jim Crow wasn't created to segregate black people's water fountains. It was created because it allowed for those things to become offenses legally that allow for black people to then be put in prisons and then for them to have free labor, right? So this system that we talk about with Jim Crow, we think that the emotional impact, the physical beatings was the overall goal, but it was actually to put more people back into slavery, right? And then laws in the North basically facilitated themselves in the same way. So although we don't have a Jim Crow in the Northeast, there were laws put into place, specifically like jobs, different things of that sort, where you could get food, not the same like you had to eat in the back, but like where you actually can be, what towns you can live in, whether they divided the school districts. All these things happened in the North in a very different way, but had the same kind of consequences, right? Jim Crow South escalated because governors won elections for that, right? Police chiefs became able to move up the ranks by how racist they were, and they had a much bigger black population, right? So black African American folks in the United States context have overwhelmingly always been in the Southeast. Probably will always be in the Southeast. So the exchange is very different because overwhelmingly that most of us are down here. So these laws impacted us the most. But all across the country, there are laws that are facilitating the same process. Moving forward to 1960s, California becomes a state where a lot of black and brown people are moving to. These same police officers then hired police from the South, mostly folks who are racist, aggressive, to then train the police forces in all of California to continue the same apparatus, right? So post-chattel slavery, we see prisons have a very direct apparatus built around them in order to get free labor. And that's really important because that's how we get to modern day slavery. When we look at prisons overwhelmingly in our country, they facilitate a process of free labor. They're supposed to facilitate a process of rehabilitation, right? A person creates a crime, we arrest them, they are put into this prison, they are then counseled, given an opportunity as far as education goes. We have family dynamics play out that we get to actually have therapy for, and they come back into society a better person. The same way that education is supposed to do that. So education is supposed to give you these educational opportunities, counselors, all this diversity, and you're supposed to come out a better person and facilitate society becoming better. And a parallel between them both is that they function almost exactly the same. You are forced to do specific things without your consent, even though people would disagree about that with schools. Like, we need education. It's like, yeah, we do need education. But the way that they function is that you are overwhelmingly controlled by the authoritative figures. They have rank and file folks who facilitate the process of you getting a job done. prisons work in that same way, a little bit more aggressive and less positive come out of it. But you are basically only released outside for an hour a day. You spend a lot of time doing manual labor, and then other than that, you basically rot in the cell, right? But there are classes, but are they able to actually get you into a diverse program that allows you to see within yourself and have the ability to actually transform? Same thing that goes with the therapy sessions. Are you actually being able to play out family dynamics, maybe conditional things that you want to talk to your family about that put you in a situation, right? If you are basically put into foster care at 7 and you were in the foster care system till 18, your reality is going to be very different than someone who was raised in a 2-parent household or 4-parent household. A group of people who actually experimented with their own family dynamics, right? And if you don't ever get to actually actualize what you were going through, you respond to the state system that we already have. And so modern day slavery is a reality that these are folks who are responding to a system, right? They want to work. People want to work. People want to contribute to society. Originally, when people were incarcerated, they were receiving $200 a month that they could give back to their families as they were in there, right? And with inflation, that's probably a good amount of money, not great, but something. Where now, they on average are going into debt. They can't feed their families. They can't provide. So these people would actually probably want to have a job so they can actually make some funds to, and I say these people, I'm talking about our incarcerated family, right? Our incarcerated family will want jobs. They will want to be able to try to do something that can provide for their family. Everyone wants to have a purpose. But then we use that in the state prison or federal prison or the prison apparatus to then make funds off of them, right? Pay them 23 cents an hour, 23 cents a day. And using that to make these funds is essentially how the prison industrial complex works, right? So we're going to talk about Florida specifically now. So the state apparatus, is trying to function its best way. Prisons, obviously, is a business that can allow for a lot of profits with very little amount of funds going into it. Florida specifically, and a lot of states in this country, then use essentially like the charter school system. What is the cheapest, most efficient way that we can do this, giving people the basic needs that are required to keep these entities going, but we don't actually put anything into it, right? That became private prisons, same way that charter schools are privately owned schools. So charter schools, like some charter schools don't have gymnasiums, they don't have specific kind of programming, they have the basic needs that you need to get the school going. Maybe not breakfast in schools, maybe not the best lunches. Private prisons are essentially the same. The state pays X amount of dollars to the organization. The organization then flourishes the best way it can, right? That looks like them making money, getting contracts with like the Walmarts, the Whole Foods, the Victoria's Secrets, the JCPenney's to get all of their stuff manufactured here for even cheaper than it could be produced, like in a China. Or like a country where we know that there's child labor laws that don't exist in the same way they do here, but people are exploited. But if you get prisoners who are technically legally able to be enslaved, you can pay them 2 cents an hour, which is the lowest payment in the case of the United States. 2 cents an hour to be making $25 pennies, right? You then sell that back to the company, they give you your share, now you're making millions of dollars a year off of these bodies. That's the case that's happening in Florida. We have one of the largest private prisons, if not the largest, I think the second largest private prison company in the world, Geo Group, which is in Boca Raton, and it has upwards to $100 million contract with the state of Florida. Florida houses more incarcerated people in this state than any bordered body of land in the world. So any other states in the United States, but also any other country in the world. Florida has more prisoners in this country than in this state, has more prisoners in this state than China has as a country, right? So clearly there is a showing that our state values this cheap slave-like labor. There's even a time where Rick Scott said that we have 3 things that we're gonna have to cut money from this year: healthcare, education, and prisons. So we better figure out how we're gonna prioritize healthcare and education, which was like, prisons was not even a question, right? Prisons were gonna get the money that they needed. There's also the reality that when you have a private prison, you are obligated to have a certain amount of beds filled constantly, right? If you don't, the state is penalized, which means the prison population has a demand for prisoners, and the state is supposed to find the supply. What that means for our people is that we are all targets, we are all prey to this system. Dream Defenders was an organization that is fighting on this, I think, on the forefront statewide. That's really important. We were started as a Trayvon Martin was murdered. He was murdered by George Zimmerman, a vigilante who took it upon himself to police a black boy with no basically right or no qualifications. And although policing in the way that it works now is overwhelmingly violent, there is a way for community members to police ourselves that is based in love, things of that sort. However, this is not George Zimmerman's reality. He wanted to make sure that this black boy realized that he was supposed to be in his place. He could not handle that situation in the way that was humane, so he killed Trayvon. And Trayvon was then criminalized by the state, by the police not arresting George Zimmerman, by the media making sure that it was important for us to know that he had a criminal record, and all these different things. And Dream Defenders was a group of young folks who were basically like, enough is enough. They did a 40-mile march, which led to George Zimmerman's arrest and the firing of that police chief. But Dream Defenders is a prison abolition organization. What does that mean? Does anyone want to take a guess? What is prison abolitionist? What does that mean? Not everybody at once.
Creating a world in which we don't use punitive punishment in order to deal with the harm that's caused.
Word. You got an idea?
Pretty much just like no more institutionalized. Like you talk about cages, right?
Mhm.
So just none of that, both spiritually, physically, and institutionally.
Exactly.
About how we,
Exactly. So for us, there's an analysis that we have that we connect to why this makes sense. Charles, I know you know this phrase very well. Dialectical materialism, something that left roots and all socialists love. So our analysis with dialectical materialism, now I can talk a little bit more about what that is that people are not born violent. Our culture is violent. Our culture is hateful. And our culture is one that is born with crime, acts against humanity, right? So a person is born into that culture and then responds to that culture by assimilation. That person does not deserve to be punitively punished or thrown into a cage. The culture actually needs to be transformed in order for that person to be its true self, right? And so dialectical materialism is a looking at social forces that are coming together at a specific time, context, and place, and how they shape our realities as people who are like unconsciously moving into them, right? Well, an analysis of what are the social forces happening, the context of these social forces moving with time and like history we are in, and what place that we're in, you are actually just moving in the world, responding to everything that's happening, right? So if a poor person is responding to hunger, they might choose to rob somebody. You know what I'm saying? As a response to the culture that they've been taught, which is like, do what is necessary to survive, and you can't depend on other people. A person who is moving in the world with an analysis that like, okay, Florida is a state that has a bunch of corporate greed. I am poor, even though I work very hard, 40 hours a week, and have multiple jobs. I don't have enough money for food. There are probably people in my community who feel the same way. Maybe we should join together and figure out some way that we have a food system that can support us, right? That is the difference between a person who is just responding to the world and a person who has that kind of analysis. Now, there's also the reality that we're born in this shit, and like that person might have an analysis and be like, yeah, but I'm around it. Like that's the reality, you know. And so when we see people make decisions, we have a culture, we have a rape culture, right? We have a name for it. So although I am not going to say that I am someone who is all the way through a process where I see a rapist and I'm like, oh, it's not their fault. The reality is that our culture actually is a culture that is founded on rape. Our society is founded on that. That's raping of women, children, lands, and resources, right? That is how the United States became the United States. Therefore, a person who is responding to that deserves to be rehabilitated, and we have to then change. We have to also be changing that culture, or nothing is actually going to change, right? But throwing a person who does like drugs, or throwing a person who robs somebody into a cage does not actually change the problem. We believe it does is it creates this other type of people, and those people are criminals. This word, criminals. What is the definition of a criminal to y'all? What is a criminal?
A person who like violates the legal rules that society has created.
Mm-hmm.
But there's tons of people that violate legal rules, and I would argue that they're not considered criminals, right? Jaywalkers and people that steal music, right? So a definition based on the people and the severity or the implied severity of what the crime was, right? So you kind of gotta analyze that too when you think about what a criminal is.
Exactly. So for me, a criminal is a person who has actually been caught by the state apparatus as doing something they deem is or is wrong. In the state of Florida, it is a felony to release a helium-filled air balloon. So if I have a balloon filled with helium, I let it go, flies in the air, I am officially technically supposed to be a criminal. I've done that hundreds of times. No one ever caught me. Been around police, they don't care. I'm a criminal, right? Person who smokes marijuana, something that comes from the earth, criminal. Someone who robs 1,000 people by making fake bank accounts at Wells Fargo, not a criminal. Oh, our apparatus is wrong. We should change our whole thing, right? These people still have jobs. Maybe not the job they used to have, they still have jobs. Person who sells a felony worth of marijuana is incarcerated, can't vote, can't own a business, all these other things, right? So we look at this system of Florida having the most incarcerated people in the world in one bordered body of land, and we say, what did most of them do? Why does it matter? Even, right? Because when we find out what they did, it just justifies how much we should care about them, right? Even if we know that what they've done is wrong. So for most, it's like 80% of the people in prison have done nonviolent crimes. People who have done violent crimes, we care about them less. That's what that means in our heads, right? You have committed an act of violence against somebody else, you are unredeemable, or you don't deserve to be around folks. You don't deserve to vote and have a say what happens in the world. You don't deserve to see your children. And that is, for us, wrong, right? Because we need to see all of our people with humanity and dignity as a means to actually change the culture that we live in, right? So what is an abolitionist framework? We're using that analysis, the dialectical materialist analysis, that people are not born violent. People are not born the people they are when they're in those cages. They're born this person full of life, innocence, dignity, and learning. Curious. They are then taught all these different things that shape the way they live. And then there are the actual material conditions that they're living in that changes their trajectory. And that analysis moves into like our framework. So the only way to actually get those people to be seen with our incarcerated family, to be seen with dignity, is to completely eradicate the systems in which tell us it's justifiable to no longer see them with dignity. That is to us the prison apparatus. The prison apparatus is a cultural system that allows us to no longer justify ourselves seeing humans with humanity, dignity, and respect, right? And that is why we use a term like criminal, an other kind of term, because a criminal could be anything. Anybody can be a criminal. But once I say that they are raped in prisons, they are murdered, if they vanish, who cares? They shouldn't have done what they did in the first place. We all have a family member or a friend who says stuff like that anyway. Like, oh, I don't give a shit, they're a criminal. Or, I mean, one of the cases that was very interesting recently, hip-hop artist XXX was killed. And people are like, well, he abused his woman. I don't care. He's fucked up. We should live without him in the first place. And there's a dialectical materialist way to look at that and say, like, he was not born violent, right? He lived in an abusive home. He lived in an area that had high rates of gun violence. He was 20 years old. He had the opportunity to be rehabilitated. Therefore, his murder should never be justified, right? I know that my favorite revolutionaries that told me if they had died, it would not be the people that they are today, one, but also the level of respect for what they've done does not exist, right? They would be these criminals. They would be these people who are doing things that were wrong. We are all in a process of becoming better, right? We all hold up to our shit, right? If I had passed away at 20, most people would be like, yo, he was a homophobe, he was transphobic, a drug dealer, the drug addict, all these different things, right? At 25, only 5 years later, I'm a completely different person because I had the opportunity of being in spaces that actually rehabilitated my person, right? We want to give that opportunity to everybody. We want people who are in all kinds of conditions to be able to say, oh, I used to be this thing, this is the norm, and now I'm this other thing. This is possible for all of us because people would buy into it, right? People want to be their best selves. People want to have purpose. Even the folks who are like very pessimistic, right? Probably some of the people who are the most wide-eyed open people, right? Most joyous, people who wanted to have the most potential, and their conditions stopped them constantly. I don't know if any of y'all have ever been in a really bad school and wanted to go to a very good like middle school, high school, and were told that you can't because of how bad your school before that was, right? I know I have friends who went to when I was in college went to uncredited schools, 4.0 GPAs, and could not get scholarships to the school that I went to, right? Because their school was uncredited. That's going to change a person's trajectory. That's going to change a person's life because at the end of the day, that's a validation of them. Right? So if you live in a culture where women are told that they are second class, and black and brown, indigenous folks are second class, we are going to respond to that in a way that also changes our trajectory. And when we use terms like criminal, then the people who are on top actually justify them killing us. You know what I'm saying? So I'll use this example. Every time a black, brown, or indigenous person is murdered, what is the first thing the media tries to do?
Yeah, like point to like the criminal.
Yep. Yep. So he stole Mike Brown. He stole Swishers. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
Like nobody's smoking the fucking tobacco in the first place. Anyone who uses a Swisher is smoking weed. So why does it matter? Why does it matter that Trayvon Martin was suspended from school? Why does it matter that Sandra Bland did not use her blinker? Because in our heads, we have a condition where, if they were a criminal, they deserve what they got. Because we believe that police are heroes, and the state apparatus, like prisons, keep us safe. My analysis, they actually put us more in danger, right? If people are put into these cages and are no longer seen as humans, you have to think about how they're going to respond to that. How are they going to respond to being always seen as less than? How are they going to respond when I go up and say, yo, I want a job, and you say back to me, oh, I'm a felon, and I'm like, oh shit, I can't hire you. How is that going to impact the person? How is it going to impact the person when they go into this 6 to 7 year sentence, get out and just want to provide for their families, and they're constantly told that we don't value you enough to value your family? That's going to make them more violent. That's going to make them more angry. That's going to make them more spiteful. That's going to make them very hateful. And that's a natural response to being told that you have no validation. You are not valued. So this is a 200-year system. Why are dream defenders doing this now? What's the purpose of it? So again, we're applying an analysis to a practice. Abolition is our practice. We want to practice destroying systems that actually harm us. We want to practice creating new systems that benefit us, right? So abolition is a look at the problem and experiment with a solution. So we're doing this now because we have to experiment with this idea of liberation. We don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. No one knows what freedom is. We have our ideas. We know what it means to us, but we actually gotta practice this, right? So abolitionist framework allows us to say that we're gonna practice these behaviors because of this mind state. An example of that is Dream Defenders is creating what is called free zones, areas where there is no sexism, homophobia, fatphobia, none of these things, right? No racism, no xenophobia, but also no police. Because when we get into struggles, we need to be able to practice how we're going to resolve them. When there are cases of harm in Dream Defenders, we do our best. It's not easy to have restorative justice processes. Because we want to make sure that people are not looking at the world as this lens of punitive punishment, right? Like there is a harm and the person who has done harm. What is the best way to get both of them to heal through this process? And one, to be held accountable, and then to have a transformation. All of this is about transformation, right? So it's super important that we actually begin to practice what transformation can look like through our analysis. And right now, we're looking at it as no police in our properties, no punitive punishment, and the ability to allow people to be in a space and just exist their fullest self without, receiving the consequences of our identities, right? In this society, there are consequences to being indigenous, black, Latinx, woman, gay, trans. There are actual physical consequences to being that because you do not meet the demand of the white male, rich Christian identity. And so we want to actually practice a world that's not the reality, right? There are no consequences from that are negative. The consequence of that is the Dream Defender is to be your full self, right? It's to see yourself as full as you can and to practice being the person that you truly believe you can be. Another reason that this is happening now for us is that prison abolition is an experiment of seeing folks deemed criminals or they're societally viewed as our lowest citizens, right? We want to see them with dignity, right? So, in reality, you can be a lot of things, but being a criminal is objectively one of the worst. The way that our society looks at you, right? I can tell somebody tomorrow, yeah, man, I used to fucking shoot guns at pigs and I used to love that shit. They'd be like, damn, well, that's kind of wild. But if I'm like, yeah, but I've been in jail 4 times, they'd be like, whoa. Keep my purse close to me, I want this person in my house certain kind of like the dude who's just slaughtering animals that clearly has no value for life, but I've been in jail for 4 marijuana charges and all of a sudden I'm the worst person certain, Not to say that either one is worse. I mean, both of them need to be, obviously, a person who shoots pigs need to be rehabilitated, but also a person who has potentially been in a situation that got them incarcerated might not actually need to be rehabilitated at all, right? If a person is just like selling weed, it's like, shit, man, why are you doing that? I gotta eat. I can't find a job. I didn't go to college. It's like, well, damn, I can't really get mad at you. There is no real solution necessary other than to make that shit legal, clearly. Like, nothing there. But, for a person who is like, nah, yeah, I used to burn down houses, it's like, all right, you need to be rehabilitated. What is going on? You know what I'm saying? Where is this coming from? And oftentimes there are connections to where people are, how they got to where they are, right? And we want to find them because if we do that, there is a process where they can heal. But we don't value our lowest in that way, right? The average person thinks about a person who is incarcerated and it's like, they don't need to be, we don't want to put no money into them, we don't give a fuck about them going to a therapist, they do this on their own. Fuck them. When the reality is these are probably people who have, one, been turned people's backs have been turned to them most of their life. And 2, they probably need the most support, right? People who are drug addicts need support. You can't fight that in isolation. You know what I'm saying? You can't fight poverty in isolation. This is not how it works. It actually attacks us. These are 2 things that make you isolate yourself because of shame, right? How are we going to actually shift that if we can't even get people to see that they should be alone? How are we going to fight that if these people are just locked in cages? We can't even see them. They are erased from us, right? People being put in prisons are erased from us like all the war crimes that our country does outside of this border. right? It's kept from us so we can continue the idea that we are good, what we do is right, and what other people do is wrong. And so we want to experiment with seeing folks who are deemed societal's lowest, with seeing them with dignity. We do that we experiment with that by having like Mama's Day bailouts, Daddy Day bailouts, where we bail folks who are incarcerated out of jail in order to experiment with them just being seen as people, and we just love on them, and we help with some of the utility needs that they have because they deserve it, right? No one deserves to have children who can't see their mothers because they have a suspended license. No one deserves a father who is incarcerated constantly because he can't get a job, but they have homework. His lights are off, so he's got to do something to get the lights on. So we help with those things, right? As a way to see, one, how do we actually help folks who are incarcerated when they get out? And two, what is the intensity of this apparatus, and how do we fight against it? That leads us to our End Money Bail campaign, because we believe that if we end money bail, then those folks who are incarcerated for nothing, who just can't afford to get out, are no longer in the system, and the system loses its power. Because it preys on folks who can't afford to get out. That's why most people who are incarcerated are lower class. Or not lower class, but working class. We overwhelmingly just believe if people who are seen as criminals are humanized and dignified, then we can humanize and dignify a lot of other people. Our margins, people on our margins. Once we can get our folks to be seen as human, then we can start really doing the work to really shift the system and building power. I would say we have just three more reasons why we are doing this right now. But prison abolition to us is an intersectional issue. The highest growing rate of incarcerated people right now is women. Black people, Latinx folks deal with incarceration at a much higher rate than white folks. Indigenous people, even higher rate than Latinx folks. We have the reality where like LGBTQIA plus folks are dealing with the prison apparatus at an alarming rate. Most of it is all starting in schools. For Black folks, Latinx folks, Indigenous folks, and LGBTQIA folks, it's starting in schools. But the population is growing. There's also the reality that it's not just about getting arrested and put into prisons. It's the reality of how they are being treated within those prisons, right? So LGBTQ folks deal with the highest rate of sexual violence and death. It's a working class issue overwhelmingly, like we were talking about earlier. Folks who can rob billions of people or create an entire economic crisis that will go to jail. Maybe one person, but we know his name. Bernie Madoff, we know the person's name. When it comes to folks like us, most of us are gone like unseen. I have cousins who I'll call my mom and they're just like, oh yeah, your cousin got out. And I was like, damn, I didn't know he went in. It's so normalized, they don't even call me when he gets arrested. So it's a working class issue. Immigrants and undocumented folks deal with this issue quite a bit. We're talking about the actual prison apparatus, that is state prisons, and we're talking about state-run detention centers. So GEO Group, again, an organization that's in Florida, has the highest rates of detention centers here. So folks are sitting in prisons for 3 years because they come here as a practice of self-determination, and they are arrested, and then they are treated inhumanely. They sit in prison for 3 years, and then they go to a detention center, sit for 3 years to be shipped to a country that is no longer their home, torn from their families. We look in Texas right now, these children who are separated from their parents, going through psychological traumas that they potentially will never get over. That's a private prison. That's not a state-run facility. It's a private prison that is building internment camps for children. And we are looking at the fact that this is affecting children at an alarming rate. School-to-prison pipelines are only getting stronger. States like Florida incarcerate youth as young as 14 and try them as adults. So they're in adult prisons. We look at 8-year-olds who have felony charges because they had temper tantrums. They no longer have the right to vote. Can't vote ever again. You know what I'm saying? So these are issues that it's affecting all of us, right? It's affecting all of us. And all of our families are being torn apart. But again, when we talk about populations, the United States also, 5% of the world, has 25% of the prison population globally. Again, Florida houses more incarcerated people in this body of border land than any other body of border land in the world. So we have a bunch of people that we are losing every single day. Just lastly, prison apparatus is one thing, but how folks are actually being treated in that apparatus is a completely different thing, right? So to get them into the prison when we know they're going to be behind a steel gate, when we know that they're going to be in solitary confinement, which is inhumane, but the fact that our children are vanishing, our women are being murdered, raped, vanishing. Men overwhelmingly deal with sexual assault and violence, murder. Drug addiction is high, extremely high in prison facilities, which is telling, right? That these folks arrest a person for using, and then they get to the place and they're still using, not going to rehab, not talking to their families. All of this is super important when we talk about building movement. Right? Like, how are we going to build a strong movement if everything that we do is us up in prison? Right? When we are angry that the state apparatus is killing our children and we go protest and they arrest us and they throw us in cages, how do we build a movement? How do we keep our families together when they're tearing our children away from us and justifying it because they're the state prison apparatus? How do we create intersectional realities when we can't even get on the same page around prisons, right? They separate it for a reason. It's a reason why Black people are overwhelmingly in state-run prisons and private prisons, and then they have a different name for detention centers. It's the same thing. It's a prison. Same thing. But yeah, they divide us. And the prison, we believe, as people who are looking at prison abolition, that these things are actually a strong hand of the state violence apparatus. So, Dream Defenders is working to end that by creating a visionary reality or a visionary thought of Florida. We call that the Freedom Papers, and we have 7 freedoms. Freedom from war and violence, freedom of movement, which is about migration or ending gentrification, freedom of mind, which is about education, freedom to be, just people being able to be their whole selves, freedom from poverty. These different freedoms as a tool to get people to see what is possible, but then grounded in the fact that the first thing that we have to stop in this state specifically is the prison apparatus. We have to end the corporate power that it has, right? So Geo Group, again, second biggest private prison company I believe in the world, is giving the most money they flood into any one party is the Florida Republicans. Now that sounds like, oh yeah, of course. But then the third highest is the Florida Democrats. And the average state gets about, on a really good state like California, second biggest country, or it's the biggest, is it the biggest state in the country, or is Texas?
No, California.
California, right. Gets $300,000 from Geo Group. We get $3 million. That's a ginormous leap, and when we think about that, it's like this is a not only battleground state, this is a testing ground state for them. They're figuring out things that they can do globally. No wonder why certain countries have these private prison contracts with them, like Israel. The reality is that they are experimenting on our bodies. They use our death as a means to get numbers that allow them to get strong. And we don't think that can exist anymore if we're actually talking about experimenting with liberation, right? We should not have a system that can tear our children away from what's justified. It should never be a reason. And the thing about it is, we look at poor working class people. For example, the young person who was arrested from Ferguson, the only person who's still in prison, when they got arrested at 16, mother was like, I'm not going to bail him out. She turned him in because she believed that this system has our best intention in mind. She saw him as a criminal. She saw him as this person who deserved a punitive punishment. We cannot exist like that. We cannot exist in that reality if we're talking about liberation or just what's better for our people. You don't have to be on the team of liberation, but if you're talking about what's best for our people, we have to figure out a means to create a society that is actually about transformation, people's healing, people's ability to be their best selves as a means to hold them accountable, right? I think overwhelmingly transformation is connected to accountability, and accountability is what we really want. We want people to understand that there are consequences for their harms, but you can be better after you deal with the consequences, not worse. So that is my presentation. It's the wave. Got any questions? I got answers.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time, I think, talking about like what abolition is and like what prison is. And you gave a couple examples of what it looks like to organize against that, talking about, ending money bail, talking about restorative justice practices. I just like do you want to maybe like give a little bit more of a sense of like sort of like what it looks like as far as that those politics in motion, like what does it look like to
So I think I think reality is we're trying to figure that out. So prison abolition and from what I know is a current movement that is really blossoming post the police violence that we've seen in this era, right? The Trayvon Martins, the Mike Browns, the Freddie Grays, Sandra Bland's, Marissa Alexander, these things. So I think we're experimenting. I think for a lot of us, the experiment, a lot of the emotion is attacking politicians, not physically, but targeting politicians because they are the choice makers when it comes to these corporate powers. At the end of the day, state-run prisons aren't the reality. Like, state-run prisons aren't a majority of our prisons. They're not the ones who actually have any power in this country. CCA has to reorganize itself every few years to survive. But GEO has an overwhelmingly strong arm on the southeast when it comes to funds that they can put into things. And so I think one way that we're thinking about it is money bail, because when we think about the apparatus of prisons, the issue that we are coming up against is that most of the things that we think about somehow makes it stronger, right? So we're doing the bailouts, but we're still paying into that institution.
Right.
We want people out of prisons, but if we just say that specifically, the Republicans or Democrats don't matter. The people who are opposition are going to say, well, why don't we give them ankle monitors, right? Ankle monitors cost about $2,500 a month. You got to pay that as a person who's incarcerated. That's not the answer. Open air prisons is not the answer. So I think that we're trying to, as a movement, figure out what are the real ways we can fight the prison apparatus, because right now, it seems that everything that we do somehow makes us strong, right? We got into a culture of direct action where getting arrested became like this action because we know that we're going against a system that we try to put it into a moral dilemma. There's these kids who really care about their communities. You can either arrest the people who are actually destroying our communities, or you can arrest us. They chose to arrest us every time. And after a while, it was like, damn, we're really just getting arrested, paying for bail, paying for bonds, paying these lawyers, going to these courts, making them money. So that's not an answer anymore. That's no longer a viable solution. So and then there's the violence that comes with that action. A lot of these people got their asses kicked by police. That's important. Mothers and children weren't able to engage. They weren't actually able to experiment with standing up to the apparatus, other than the action itself. People, lost family members for 3 to 5 to 6 to even 4 years. 3 to 5, 6 months to now 4 years for the young man who's in prison in Ferguson. So we're trying to figure out what is the tool. What we see now is that ending money bail is the first step, because ending money bail is giving us the ability to get as many people who have been brought into the apparatus but do not have to stay in it out right away. Get them out. There has been works in like New York to raise the age where like 14-year-olds, if you're less than 18 or you can't be, I think it's actually 16. you're less than 16, you can no longer legally be tried as an adult. There are kids 12 getting tried as adults. Every young person who caught a moderate murder charge is more than likely to get charged as an adult. That's set as life sentence, which is technically 72 years. 72 years in an adult prison from 12 on. What is the psychological trauma that they're going through? I can only imagine, right? That's been another way we've been doing it. Ending the school to prison pipeline, making sure that they're not policing schools is another way of ending the prison apparatus. I think restorative justice as a whole is one way of ending the prison apparatus. So there's a lot of ways that we're experimenting, but none of them are the answer. I think abolition movements are layered, right? You look at the slave abolition movement. It started out with obviously rebellions of black people on slave ships, fighting to hold their countries in Africa. Some folks just didn't make it. They were brought over here. People had mass suicides on slave ships. You know what I'm saying? People then got here at uprisings, Haitian revolutions, but then there were people who still didn't make it to liberation and had the rebellions on the slave master plantations, still could not get out, ran to freedom, and then there were white people who joined, and then there was a movement that, obviously really didn't win because Lincoln did not free us, but, overwhelming, got us to the position that we are today, right? Which is an experimentation with a freedom that we did not have in time of slavery, right? And so this is going to be a fight, and I think we have a lot of things that we're experimenting with. I think, attacking the school to prison pipeline was the first thing. Legalizing marijuana. All these different things are different aspects, but at the end of the day, legalizing marijuana helps a lot of people stay out of prison, but there are also this reality with the opioid crisis. Where as much as white people are saying we want to have these humane ways of treating this is fucked up, there's a bunch of people who lost their lives to the crack epidemic in prisons. And there are a bunch of people who are losing their lives to the opioid epidemic. Because they're only trying to be humane to the people who are getting prescribed pills. They're not talking about people who are shooting heroin. These people are not. I know folks who are police officers who are arresting those people. That's it. Florida has a law that if you are arrested for an opioid, you are you have to go to a drug class and then reduce your sentence, but you still live 3 months. So we're trying to figure out. I think we have a lot of ways that's been happening on the ground organizationally. Now, as far as thought processes and campaigns, there are a lot of key campaigns that, or campaign models that I think are really impressive. The Invest, Divest campaign model is one way. So specifically with dream defenders, there is the idea that people who have taken money from candidates or legislators who have taken money from GEO would divest from GEO by taking all the money that they've gotten and reinvesting it into the community. That's a campaign model that they've been using. Songs that are on new grounds started the bailouts and then are using that as a means to begin the conversation about money bail. And there's a lot more that they can talk about, I think, with that. You have organizations like BYP 100 who are doing a lot of different organizing tactics and just different cultural shifts that are happening to attack the prison apparatus and increase the abolitionist movement. I think even Power Youth, we have an Invest Divest campaign that is divesting from police and schools and investing in counselors and student supports and teachers' wages. That's another means in which to attack the prison apparatus. But I think all these are experiments with it that are still in the vastness of what we can do, still very small, because this is a big system. No one's about to run into a fucking prison and blow it up. Prisoners are organizing our in-prison family is organizing from the inside. But it's a big system that is physical, right? So I'm all for folks who are organizing to end patriarchy. That's a cultural thing that has physical consequences. Prison apparatus is physical. It's physical like our border, where there is no amount of education or no amount of therapy that's going to get you to transform your actions to show a new way of living. We actually have to stop it. So I think that we are figuring it out as a means not also reinvesting. That's also looking like a small thing that like teachers are doing with their 401ks. They're asking to take their investments out of guns and bullets, right? Because at the end of the day, people who are invested in guns and bullets are the same people who are invested in private goods.
Right.
So that's some stuff.
That's great.
Any other
Did
questions?
anybody else want to go?
So I came in late. Sorry, I came from West Palm Beach, hit the 95, but yeah.
That's rough.
So I don't know. I guess would you be able to like do a short rundown of like the bullet points of the first half hour? That's all right.
So basically, we just talked about like the history of prisons, what they are, how we have as peoples historically engaged with them, and then we went more deeply into the United States context with chattel slavery. I didn't talk a lot about immigration and like the immigration waves, but like the waves of immigration also interacted with prisons very intimately. Even like specifically with deportations and just police violence all over the country. Indigenous folks' histories with prisons are very intimate and specific. I don't know a lot about that, so I will not speak on it. I don't want to get false information. And then we talked so from chattel slavery, we went to the 13th Amendment, which is like, basically your ass is free unless you fuck up, and your ass ain't free no more. We talked a lot about that and just how that is causing economically, that is modern day slavery. I think, obviously spiritually, mentally, it's not. Like I don't have to worry about getting my ass beat and being forced to have sex with my cousin and shit because that's someone's property. But spiritually, it is. People are forced to work for no gains, forced to labor, and are not making any funds for it. They're not paid for the labor. They're not compensated for the labor. They're not respected for the labor. And then there is someone who's making hundreds of millions of dollars off of that same labor. They choose not to pay for it. Free labor. And then we dove into Florida specifically. I said several times, just like Florida has the most incarcerated people in any border body of land anywhere else in the world. States, countries. From there, I basically went to Dream Defenders, an organization that started in Florida, a statewide organization only in Florida, that started after Trayvon Martin was murdered. So Dream Defenders is an organization, I didn't talk a lot about this, but Dream Defenders is an organization that is socialist, and it is organizing for the liberation of Black, brown, indigenous, queer, children, women, folks, people, and what we do is we organize around the socialist values that led us to prison abolition being a priority of our state for our work. Not priority for our state for everybody, but for our work specifically. We do that now because just the conditions of the prison apparatus are the most egregious, in our case, in the world. In our analysis. Now, I have never been to a prison like Guantanamo Bay, which I'm pretty sure as an individual prison is worse. But as a reality, the amount of prisons that we have, the amount of population that we have, and the rate of death, vanishing rate, contextually, I think we have the worst. So that is kind of what that's kind of what we're doing. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to give another chance, I wanted to follow up because when you answered like my previous question, one of the things that you touched on was the fact that like so the prison system right now is this physical apparatus, and it's like deeply woven itself into the fabric of like how our society works, and it's there in a physical way, and so undoing it, like you would like it's not just a matter, like you said, of sort of people sort of reimagining things on an individual basis or in small groups. there has to be sort of larger, larger like systemic implementation of new ideas. And so I guess if you want to talk a little bit, one thing I'm interested in is like ways that we can sort of take the idea of restorative justice and like actually like systematize it within the fabric of society, because when I hear about it in the context of it being like an informal basis where a group comes together to do it, usually like an organizing group comes together to do it. And I'm just wondering if there's any been any work done on sort of how to actually make it part of the formal way that society operates.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
Yes.
Because it's sometimes people commit crimes against people who they don't know, or people who aren't part of their community, or people in a place where they don't even live. So how do you that's sort of how do we deal with that?
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna, before I address the last point, which is folks who commit harms. I'm just taking notes on what I'm gonna address.
Right.
So the third point is folks who commit harms on communities that they are not in or adjacent to.
Right.
Give me 1 second as I write that down. I don't want to forget anything about that. So first I think the thing that we have to, so my first point is that restorative justice is a traditional practice, right? So I think that the way our movement is using it and the way that it's used in general are two different things, right? Our movement is coming into this practice in a reality, I would say the movement that I'm talking about, the South Florida organizing culture, and most of the Florida organizing culture is coming into restorative justice in the last 4 years, right? 5 years at the longest. And now I would say really 3 years. It's been in some organizations, but the last 3 years people are really trying it on. But it's a traditional practice that is actually about harmer and harmed sitting in a space and being counseled through a process that leads to accountability process and transformation.
Right.
So in the case of that would have to be woven into the societal norm in order to function in a way that is not informal. To function in a way that is seen as equal to society as a weight of a court. Right? You know what I'm saying? So I think that the goal is to get that traditional understanding of it brought into our society as a norm. But right now, our norm is judge, jury, and execution.
Yeah.
With that being said, the way that and this is because our movement is new to it, the way that our movement uses restorative justice is only in the case of harms. So restorative justice is a part of a culture of circle keeping, which is a people's having a circle that is for people to be heard, for people to listen. So if I have an issue I need to speak, I'm the only person talking so that you can actually hear me. There's no back and forth. There's me talking, and you have an opportunity to speak, as a cycle. And that is essential because when you are unable to hear, things get lost in translation. There is an ability to escape accountability, and there is a process in which you might just completely misunderstand what I'm talking about, right? And we see that in our courtrooms, correct? Our courtrooms, our laws are so jumbled, it's really impossible for a person to go in there. Also, I'm on the defense and you're on the attack. That's prosecution and defense, where there is no actual reality for us to see each other as human beings, or actually just trying to go through a human process. So I think the traditional practice is about people's humanity and dignity being a reality in this space, and that we move through our space, reminding ourselves that this is a human being. I see them with dignity. respect, I'm going to either hear them or speak my truth. There are values that you put into place. There is a process of going through commitments, all these different things. So I think that's how I think the idea of it is, the bigger idea. Now, how we as people who are still using the courts have begun to try that on, I think, is one with Dream Defenders who are abolitionists who are like, we're not going to use the police, trying that on in our culture. I think this is like building an alternative institution. We got to practice it as a commune before we can give it to the masses. Because we have to be guidance. We have to be the guidance, right? So like if there's someone gets shot down here and I just run up like, yo, we should have RJ circle. And I'm like, all right. First of all, they're gonna be like, what the fuck? But like, let's say they're just really open-minded individuals. And they say like, all right, let's do it. And I'm like, oh shit, let me call Drew. No. You can't call somebody. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I bring it to the space, I need to know how to do it. So in that case, we are working to get as many people trained on RJ as possible so we can hold those circles. That's like for our movement. On the other end, that's for like our organizing culture, I would say in South Florida. Now, Dream Defenders is also connected to some folks who are RJ practicers for like the courts.
Right.
So instead of a person going to, like a defendant going to court, speaking to the law and then like, you know, getting prosecuted, they go through RJ processes with these folks I'm talking about. Rapists, murderers, all that sort of stuff. The shit that people really don't have any space for, you know. They go through these processes with them and then have a conversation with the judge around accountability processes. The goal is obviously to get them to be in prison as short of a time as possible. And the reality is that like they're still in the courtroom. They're trying to bring this alternative to a system that already exists. So that is another, I think, you know, and they help us. They really guide us in how we should be doing it in our organization. I can get you specific names in Dream Defenders, like I know it helps. But in our processes, we have used folks who are actually doing this in the mainstream society as a means to really understand how this can function in our organization. So that's two ways I think we're trying to make it normal, right? Like it's a thing that everyone can be a part of. I think there are also, so for the foreign communities thing, I think that's a big question that I'm also very interested in figuring out how we do, because, you know, for example, when you think about like the Keystone Pipeline, you know, and Standing Rock, you know, like we are looking at a society in which our consumerism actually does harm to these folks. Because if there was no consumption of the resource they wanted to take, there would be no need for them to do it. Now, obviously, that's a really watered down way to talk about this issue, but that is a way to perceive it, right? You can say the same thing about animal life, right? Like, nobody was trying to buy beef, motherfuckers gonna be killing cows. But the reality is, it's a little bit more complex than that. But at the same time, I think the reality is we have to build a model of RJ big enough to hold community-wide conversations, right? We don't want, the thing about RJ is the reason why you have to consent to an RJ process before you're in it is because you have to come into this space with the intention of healing and transformation on all sides, not just defending your case, right? And like there has to be part of the accountability process is an acknowledgement of the harm you committed, right? And I think that to have community-wide conversations right now with a space like, even if we say like Little Haiti, right? Like Little Haiti and then a group of folks who are like trying to buy houses in Linden City. Are they actually going to be able to sit down and see how their impact is shaping someone's life? No. So what we'd have to do, I think, you know, the same thing about how we experiment with the finding of the prison apparatus. It's like we have to build some kind of we have to experiment with these small models, do the research, have the case that he's built so that we can spread it to our movements. That's one thing that our movement has to get better at. I think, you know, we do a lot of think pieces and shit, and like motherfucker can't like look at that and be like, these are the objective truths. It's like, oh yeah, I see what they're saying. 'Cause I feel this way. No, what objectively is happening, right? So when we have our RJ process, we can objectively like these shits take 6 to 12 months. If a person is looking for a hard crackdown in a 2-week, they kick them the fuck out of Dream Centers. That's not gonna happen. So when we talk to another organization, they're like, yo, we're trying on RJ, it's like, you need to be, that's a mistake that we made. We didn't realize it took that long. We now have the ability to be like, RJ takes 6 to 12 months for maybe like 5 people. You know, that's a long fucking time. But it might take 3 to 4 months for a motherfucker to even acknowledge what they did was wrong, right? Especially if you're looking at harms that look like sexual violence or like authority, people with clout or authority misusing their power, right? And you can look at that when you talk about like foreign harms. I'm just going to use gentrification because it's like really simple in my head. But like if a person's like, yo, I'm just actually trying to get a job. I'm trying to get a job. I'm gonna live in a house 15 minutes from my job. It's like, cool, bro. I understand you're about to be the manager of Jimmy John's. Like we didn't want that shit in the first place. You know what I'm saying? So like you are legitimizing their decision to destroy our communities. It's gonna take a person a long time to accept that. Specifically because like, bro, I'm poor like you are. You know what I'm saying? Same way it takes cops who are working class people forever, if they ever accept that they killed somebody justly. You know, and that's another that could be like another community wide, like the police community versus communities of black folks are actually trying to have this kind of conversation that they're not willing to have. So RJ, I think when you look at the values of it, if a person can't accept that they've done something wrong, and if a person is unable to really commit to the transformation, it's very hard. It's like almost impossible to move forward. And so, yeah, I think we would have to case study it with our local movements, our community members, and folks who are open-minded to it, as a means to try to get to this broader thing. I think our movement also needs to deeply invest in RJ before we can do that, right? I think we're invested in it as an idea because we don't like prisons and police. We need to invest in it as a cultural reality, right? Like we have to invest in it where it's normal. So if I were to like stab you, right? I mean, it's a terrible thing. But if I were to stab you right now, and you're like, oh shit. I know in your head you might be like, I don't want to call the police, I don't want to fuck up his life. But like, what are we gonna do? We should have instantly our solutions, not just our problems. And I think that's the kind of investment we need in RJ. When like a person, someone's stabbing, like, yo, I gotta figure out a way to get this RJ process going. Obviously, it's not gonna happen like, oh shit, I'm stabbing. Oh, RJ, it's gonna be like after a while, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, yo, fuck, bro, like. I'm trying to have this RJ process. Like, you fucking stabbed me, and I'm pissed about it. But I don't want you to go to jail for 20 years. So, like, yo, you gonna run this or not? And that's kind of. I think when we can get that as a norm in our movement, then we can figure out broader, right? Like, then we can experiment with our homies who are saying some racist shit at a party. Then we can experiment with our homeboy who says some sexist shit to this woman that he doesn't know. And then we can get to like, okay, these are two people coming from cultural realities. Or just different fucking streets in the same city. But like, I have an argument process with these two random motherfuckers. I can then do it with like 2 people who need the whole. It's just about how much space we